Hi, everyone. This is Crissy from Smart Approaches to Marijuana and the Parent Action Network Division. And I'm here today with Jordan Davidson, our Director of Government Affairs, to answer some of the questions that our parents and advocates have had about the president's executive order to reschedule marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 substance. So let's get right into it. Jordan, again, our parents have had so many questions, and I know there's a lot of information out there, but sometimes they like to hear someone actually speaking about this, right? So not just reading about it. So one of the first questions, and most important, of course, is does President Trump's executive order mean that marijuana has been officially rescheduled?
Well, thanks for doing this, Chrissy, and hello to all the parents and advocates out there. I'm glad that there's so much interest in this topic and to get informed about it. So, for the first question, no, this does not mean that marijuana has been rescheduled. The president executive order is essentially a directive to the federal government to do something in a certain way, to take certain action, and has basically like the enforceability of law. And the executive order, though, that President Trump signed it, he actually legally was unable to just say, hey, marijuana is automatically rescheduled. What instead it says is to expedite the rescheduling process. So, as you may have seen a few years ago, HHS under the Biden administration started the process. They sent it over to DOJ and DEA. And there's this long process that has to be completed before marijuana rescheduling can kind of get cemented. It's, basically what the president basically said was prioritize this, please. So it's anybody's guess as to when that will eventually happen. It could be by the end of the first quarter of this year. It could be 6 months. Nobody's really sure.
hmm And in the past, for the parents that don't know about this, we've been dealing with this for quite a few years. And there was a time, probably about a year and a half ago, where there was a document being created to kind of facilitate this process. And we did have parent advocates speak out about this and were involved in that. And so some of you parents might remember that. Then also you mentioned DOJ and DEA. So I want to clarify for our parents who don't know that the DOJ obviously is the Department of Justice and DEA is the Drug Enforcement Administration. So these are two very involved organizations in the process. I also want to add that, and Jordan can confirm that this was stalled, and Sam, of course, had a lot to do with that as well. But the whole issue of rescheduling was stalled for quite some time. So it's just coming up again with the president's executive order. So a lot of parents are wondering, despite his inability to actually enforce it immediately, is it inevitable?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I hate to say it probably is in a sense inevitable. The reason I almost like want to waffle on that is on the one hand, of course, I want to keep out some hope. I think there are three or four possible situations. One is that the executive order, it gets fulfilled and the process is expedited and we have marijuana be rescheduled. Now, in that case, the fight does not stop. We have already publicly announced that we have retained a law firm that is actually run by former Attorney General Bill Barr. And that firm will be helping us if marijuana rescheduling is finalized in mounting a legal challenge to the rescheduling order because the way in which this process was conducted is was really problematic actually had a lot of flaws in the process so there's ample kind of things for us to use in a lawsuit to try and shoot this down. So does it mean that it will last forever, even if it does kind of get fulfilled, the executive order? No, that's not necessarily the case because of a lawsuit. Another option is if we can kind of stave this off and if the administration sort of slow walks this despite the executive order, maybe the midterms that are coming up in November happen. I think a lot of this was money. I think a lot of this was politics
Mhm.
and wanting to get something kind of juicy for the midterms, thinking this will increase youth voter turnout. I don't think it will. If that midterm comes and goes without marijuana rescheduling, I think they have less of an incentive to move on it. The final outcome, which I also, think could be, 50-50 shot, is our team is working day and night to get a bill across the finish line in Congress called the No Deductions for Marijuana Businesses Act. We're going to be talking about that on the Hill next month, actually, with some advocates. And that legislation would essentially block the billions of dollars in tax cuts for the marijuana industry that will come with marijuana rescheduling because of this weird loophole in the tax law that will let pot shops deduct lots of expenses that they were previously unable to under a new scheduling regime. And that bill was introduced in February of 2025, and we are fighting to get that across the finish line so that even if marijuana is rescheduled, the biggest downside, which would be this billions of dollars that would kind of be put back into the industry's pockets, that will be kind of negated. So we'll almost take the teeth out of rescheduling. So the fight is not done yet. We very much are still in the game in many different ways.
Right. And so another question regarding the process is who actually makes the final decision?
Yeah, so that's sort of a tricky question. I mean, procedurally, the DEA makes the final decision, but it's really the DOJ. So the Drug Enforcement Administration, it's like an arm within the Department of Justice,
Mhm.
and so the Attorney General really makes that final decision. It also has to pass a review because this is what's called a federal rule, right? This is doing something through a regulatory process. And that has to kind of get the stamp of approval from OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget, probably the most powerful part of the federal government, actually. They basically give their stamp of approval to any dollar that gets spent in from the federal government. And so they have to approve it. We have a lot of champions actually at OMB, a lot of people who are with us now, and we know the Attorney General isn't in favor of marijuana. We know the DEA definitely doesn't like marijuana. Now, the unfortunate thing, right, is the president made his position very, very clear here through the executive order. So I think they're going to listen to the president, but maybe they slow walk it a little bit. Who knows? That's kind of what we're seeing, but it's really DOJ who gives the final stamp of approval to give a final answer there.
Okay. So the next couple of questions are on marijuana as medicine. So there's a lot of questions about that because, of
Mhm.
course, one of the big arguments that the pro industry tries to push is that, oh, this opens up research and this and that. So a lot of our parents have asked questions like, well, isn't there aren't there marijuanas that are used as medicine and aren't there FDA approved medicines? So the questions are basically like, does rescheduling marijuana automatically regulate it? And does it mean that marijuana is safe for medical use? So I'm lumping those together
Yeah.
because, again, they're all the same topic, really, and a lot of question about that.
Yeah, so no, rescheduling does not impact anything regarding the quote unquote medical use of marijuana. It does not impact anything regarding that regulatory framework. It does not impact anything regarding, if you live in a state with medical marijuana, medical marijuana is no more legal. It's like people have tried to frame this in the media as, oh, well, a less
Hmm.
criminal drug or this or that and reschedule. Okay, no. If a drug is the Controlled Substances Act, the CSA, we call it, right? It has a system, a scheduling system, and schedules 1 through 5. All of those drugs in a schedule 1 through 5, if obtained through an illegal source or through a non-approved source, is illegal. It's flat out
Hmm.
illegal. And currently, there are no sources, there are no channels through which marijuana can basically be legally obtained. So I think that's like the best way to think about it, right? So even if marijuana is whatever schedule it's in, there's a track. For example, I'll take an easy example the parents will probably very much, you guys will very much understand. Fentanyl, right? We all know about fentanyl, right? Fentanyl, illegal. You're going to probably go to jail for the rest of your life if you sell fentanyl, right? But fentanyl is used in hospitals, right? So
Yeah.
there's a legal channel. If you've had a surgery, you've probably had fentanyl, right? So if
Hmm.
you there's a legal channel that fentanyl can go into. Now, the issue with marijuana is if you want to talk about just the drug marijuana, smoking a joint, there is no legal channel that exists for marijuana to go through. And so all marijuana is federally illegal. The FDA likely will never approve marijuana as a drug. They've never approved a plant, the name of a plant, as a drug before that's FDA approved, because there's harms and side effects. And something that we talk about a lot is, you may hear anecdotal stories of people who say, well, marijuana is effective for me. And even believing those people, let's say marijuana is taking away their pain. Let's say that's true, which a lot of evidence says it's not, but let's say it is. That doesn't mean it's safe
Right.
and effective, right? Marijuana's harms are too dangerous for it to actually be a regulated drug. So that's kind of one category. You can think of the second category as you might be listening to me and being like, "Whoa, I thought Sam has been saying there actually are marijuana derived drugs that are FDA approved." That is true. But the key word is marijuana derived. So
Hmm.
there are drugs that have been on manufactured by pharmaceutical companies and prescribed by doctors going back to the 1980s, that a handful of them that are derived from the marijuana plant. It's not just rolling up a joint and smoking it, but it is, for example, Marinol, which is actually already a Schedule 3 drug, which is
Hmm.
pure synthetic THC. It is not smokable. It's not inedible. It's in, a specific delivery form and a specific dose. It's synthetically made by a pharmaceutical company that is dispensed by a pharmacy and prescribed by a doctor, right?
Right.
It's not how pot shops work today. And so that exists, and none of that, frankly, will change with rescheduling. That will exist just as it has since the 1980s, but the marijuana industry doesn't make money off of that, right? So
Right.
they want other things.
Yeah, that was such a great explanation because I often talk about and use the example of prescribed medicine.
Yeah,
So like you said, if I go here in New York or I go to Florida with a prescription for Marinol, I'm getting the exact same product. That will never be the case out of medical or recreational dispensaries
right.
anywhere you get this marijuana of today,
And that's
which is
that was the problem with rescheduling, right? So
right.
actually, before this rescheduling order, before the Biden administration did it, one of the many factors that a drug had to fulfill to be deemed acceptable, safe medicine was, can it be reproduced? The Biden administration actually ditched that entirely because marijuana was never going to fit that. As Crissy, as you just
Mhm.
said, if I get prescribed, Adderall, you get prescribed Adderall, we both get 10 milligram pills. I never taken Adderall. I don't know if that's standard dose or not, but just making it up. We want to know we're getting the exact same thing. I think we would be
Right.
astonished if we got totally different things. It's very
Hmm.
hard to reproduce the marijuana plant in a recognizable, kind of accurate way, and so it's not really fit to be medication.
Right.
And so rescheduling though, like bottom line, for you guys, changes nothing about that process.
Hmm. Thank you for that. So, moving on to rescheduling and advocacy. So many of our parents were so concerned and saying, well, why are we advocating? Why do we need to keep advocating?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, please speak to us about that a little bit about how this doesn't really change our messaging.
No, no, no. And so, I mean, I think there are a couple of things. One, in terms of the wider like frame of advocacy, marijuana is not legal. We still have that fight. We there are lots of pieces of legislation that are, that the marijuana industry wants to pass. They haven't passed like the Safe Banking Act that we fight. We have to keep the hemp laws intact, which, you all were instrumental in educating lawmakers about. And so the fight generally still goes on. As it relates to rescheduling, the fight also goes on there. As I had mentioned a few minutes ago, we have legislation that was introduced almost a year ago to take the teeth out of rescheduling, to gut it, right? We are opposing rescheduling for myriad reasons, but chief among them is the major tax cuts that marijuana dispensaries will get if rescheduling goes through. And we have figured out a way through Congress to make it so that if our bill gets passed, those tax cuts, no matter if rescheduling happens, won't occur. They will not be eligible for those tax breaks. And that's all that the marijuana industry wants. They don't want research. Right? They don't want any of that stuff, right? They don't care. They want the tax cuts. And so that is a big battle for us. And we need congressional support. And, I will actually always remember a story from our last Hill Day with some parents where a congressman who kind of was instinctively in agreement with us on this issue, but hadn't thought much about it or met anyone who had talked to him about it, met a family that came to the Hill Day, and he told us, I'm now always going to remember, your guys' faces when I hear about this issue. I've now put a name, kind of a face to a story to the issue. And that's the most important thing, more than anything I can do as a lobbyist going every day, talking, giving them statistics. And that congressman actually was asked to sign on to a letter that was very pro hemp in the Delta 8 fight, and he refused to sign it. And I think that was in large part because of our parent advocacy. And so when it comes to the rescheduling battle, just like with the hemp battle, we need you guys to go to your congressmen, to go to your senators with us, however you need to, however you can, and let them know that you've been impacted by this and that there is a real policy fight here with the marijuana tax cuts. And I guarantee you that most of those congressional staff, that most of those members of Congress who represent you, will not forget your face and your story, and that they will think of that when these issues come up in front of them. And that is the most important thing that we could possibly do. And so the fight is far from over.
Well, thank you, Jordan. That was such a wonderful lead into the reminder of Hill Day and how important it is. And for those parents joining us, as Jordan said, your stories really matter, and you'll find this day so empowering. And it's just a few weeks away. So, please, listen to this webinar and take it to heart. And also, we'll be attaching other documentation. The Smart Approaches to Marijuana website has an incredible myriad of information on rescheduling, which you will all be required to review. And there's some one pagers as well that you can download for your own use in your own states. And we'll learn and talk about that some more at the Hill Day as well. And then regarding marijuana as medicine, I just want to mention that you should all take a listen to the Fortitude podcast's most recent episode, season 3, episode 2. We have Ann Hassel from Massachusetts, who is a former bud tender who really breaks down what's going on inside those dispensaries. So, and then for those of you joining us on the Hill, you will get to meet Jordan in person, and as well as many other SAM staff. So we look forward to having you. We hope this was very helpful. And Jordan, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chrissy. Looking forward to seeing you guys on the 4th.